The one thing that surely made the Americans regret their decisions deeply. During World War II, they didn't use bombers to completely destroy Japan's shipyards. In the end, the Japanese used these surviving docks to rise as the world's top shipbuilding power, snatching market share from Europe and America. During World War II, Japan contributed a total of 2.05 million tons of steel scrap to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. This record remains unbroken to this day. After World War II, Japan was determined to revive its shipbuilding industry. However, under the rule of Supreme Commander MacArthur, Japan's shipbuilding capabilities were tightly restricted. It wasn't until the Korean War broke out that the US loosened its grip. And so Japan began to reclaim its dream of becoming a maritime power. But here's something bizarre. Many of Japan's shipyard core facilities escaped American bombing. For example, the Kure shipyard in Hiroshima, which built in Yamato, had 70% of its above-ground structures destroyed. But its key dry docks suffered only minor damage and could be repaired for reuse. Moreover, many other shipyards similarly avoided destruction by US bombers. Keep in mind that many of these shipyards were originally built using reparations from the First Sino-Japanese War. It's truly a shame that these militaristic assets weren't sent to the bottom of the sea to accompany Admiral Imamoto Isoroku. Why did this happen? Did the Americans deliberately show mercy? The Japanese themselves claim that they don't know. In 1966, two Japanese Self-Defense Force officers wrote an article stating, "Whether this was intentional or not, we still haven't figured out. But regardless, Japan's shipbuilding industry managed to preserve some of its foundations." Anyway, these remnants alone weren't enough. At the time, Japan's shipbuilding industry lacked one critical thing: steel. Modern shipbuilding costs consist of three major components: labor, construction materials, and supporting equipment. Together, they account for about 80% of total cost. Among them, steel, specifically shipbuilding plates, makes up nearly 30%. And it must be sourced locally due to the high transportation costs of imports. So the first rule written should be steel first. You must become a steel powerhouse first. Japan's steel mills weren't as lucky as its shipyards. Most were bombed into rubble by the US. It wasn't until the Korean War that Japan, with American support, rebuilt its steel industry. By 1953, production had surpassed the pre-war levels, and from then on, it skyrocketed, finally solving the shipbuilding steel plate problem. Besides steel, another critical factor for shipbuilding is capital, which is money. The modern shipbuilding industry has two key secrets: labor and capital. A shipyard's fixed assets investments are enormous, requiring massive amounts of capital. If a shipyard had to rely solely on its own savings, it would never be enough. To support shipbuilding, Japan went all out. Starting in the 1950s, Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry introduced enormous policies to promote shipbuilding, converting credit, land subsidies, export policies, and more. The government provided cheap land and banks and offered no-interest loans. The book, The End of the Japanese Economic Miracle, even documents a bizarre subsidy method, giving shipbuilders sugar. Yeah, I mean literal sugar. At the time, Japan lacked foreign currency reserves, and sugar imports were strictly restricted. Any company with a sugar import license could resell it for profit. To encourage shipbuilding, the Japanese government issued sugar import licenses to shipbuilders, allowing them to profit from reselling sugar. Don't underestimate this method. Through it, the Japanese government subsidized 10 billion yen, effectively slashed ship export prices by 20 to 30%, and greatly boosting the industry. Then the Japanese added a second rule: industrial subsidies. Europe and America had been doing it long before East Asian countries, but in terms of creative and converted subsidy methods, the Japanese were truly unprecedented. Later, many of China and South Korea's tactics were learned from them. Now, with steel and capital secured, what else was needed? Okay, one more thing: skilled workers. As many know, Japan was already a major shipbuilding power before World War II, second only to Britain and America. At the peak of the Pacific War, Japan had over 100,000 engineers and skilled workers. Early in the war, these workers were strictly protected from military conscription. But by 1944, as Japan struggled on all fronts, they began forcefully drafting shipbuilders to serve as frontline soldiers on Pacific Islands. About half were conscripted. Of the remaining half, another half were perished in US bombings. But at war's end, only about 30,000 skilled workers remained. Those familiar with manufacturing know that traditional factories relied heavily on experimental knowledge. Without guidance from master craftsmen, apprentices could waste countless parts without figuring things out. Thus, these 30,000 surviving skilled workers played a crucial role in reviving Japan's shipbuilding industry. By 1952, they had trained over 100,000 full-time shipbuilders. Most department heads, deputy managers, and managers in Japanese shipyards at the time were the same people who had once built aircraft carriers and battleships. With steel, subsidies, and skilled labor, Japan cloned back Europe's shipbuilding market share. From the mid-1960s to the 1980s, Japan dominated global shipbuilding, at one point holding over 50% of the market. And it just so happened to coincide with the industry's first major boom cycle. A quick primer here, shipbuilding is a highly cyclical industry. Since World War II, it has experienced three major boom cycles. The first from 1967 to 1975, the second from 2002 to 2010, and the third starting in 2020 and continuing today. The first boom was triggered by the Suez Canal crisis and fueled by the surging demand for large tankers, peaking in 1973 with the oil crisis. Since ships typically take 2 years to build, production volumes didn't bottom out until 1975. Because Japan had already become the world's top shipbuilder before this boom began, it was like gold raining from the sky. The Americans caught it in test tubes, the British in wash basins, but the Japanese built swimming pools to collect it. They made an absolute fortune. History tells us when the Japanese strike it rich, who in the world sees with envy the most? Yes, it's always the Koreans. And so, with almost maniacal determination, South Korea became the second contender to enter the East Asian shipbuilding monster room. Follow me to witness another monster for part 3.